Hi everyone, how you doing? I had a question in the Q&A. I'm trying to get this. That's better. Okay, yeah, we had some really good questions in the Q&A. So tonight I am going to pop in to talk about how alcohol works in terms of impact on the brain. So as you know, alcohol is a drug. So a drug is something that alters the way we think and feel in many, many different ways. It's also a toxin. Alcohol is a poison as well. So it's quite interesting. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about how it works on the brain and the neurotransmitters. I will try and find you something that goes into that detail. But I think the only place where I've seen it, where I trust the information, is in Drink, and that's by Professor David Nutt. But I will see what I can do for you. Okay, so when we drink alcohol, sometimes there is an element of anticipation. So you start getting some of those chemical releases before the alcohol even starts doing its starts doing its job. And that's just about the habit and the anticipation and the association. Years and years and years ago, I used to teach drug and alcohol education to children. And I would go into quite in depth and we would talk about different drugs. And some of the children would be able to, if they were drug users, so I quite often used to work with quite high risk children, they would start by thinking about the drug and talking about the drug. They would start to get the same sort of feelings of the drug. I mean, that is the power of the brain. The brain is amazing, right? When we can learn how to harness that, we do not need to take any drugs because we can do it for ourselves, which is amazing. Okay, so as you know, when we drink alcohol, so it goes down into our stomach, where when it goes into our stomach and the small intestine, that's where the alcohol goes into our bloodstream. And this is the thing, like with alcohol, so it's a toxin, it's a poison. There is not one part of the body that may not be impacted by alcohol because it goes into our blood and our blood is everywhere. So alcohol is implicated in over 60 diseases, but I'm going to try and focus on specifically the brain stuff today rather than sort of the long-term body health risk. If you want me to do that, let me know. I'll come in and do that as well at a certain time. So it happens quite quickly, as I'm sure you're aware. We have a drink, it goes into our stomach, into our small intestine. We start to feel those effects of the alcohol quite quickly. They go into our bloodstream and starts impacting on our brain and starts to have an effect. Our blood vessels widen, we can start to feel a little bit flushed, maybe a bit relaxed, and that's where you get that sort of sociable feeling around that. And that's to do with the GABA, which is what Professor David Nutt has tried to replicate with sentia, which is quite interesting. I mean, obviously it won't be exactly the same because he's used quite a lot of herbal stuff, but he's used some interesting, if you look at the ingredients and you look at stuff around supplements, that's quite interesting as well. So GABA is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. So sometimes it's turned down a bit in social situations, which can make us feel anxious and tense. So when we feel alcohol, it gives us that nice, when we take alcohol, it gives us that nice, relaxed feeling, that warm feeling. And that's one of the things we can say about alcohol, isn't it? That it is a social lubricant. I mean, that is pretty much the only good thing we can say about it. And that's the one drink. If you can have the one drink, great. But as you know, for a lot of people, it's more than one drink. So that temporary feeling of warmth in your body, definitely. And the dopamine kicks in, so that's the seeking hormone. So quite often when we get those sort of dopamine hits, that's when we want more of that, all those different endorphins that we get. Sometimes people feel energized, sometimes, you know, people feel more relaxed, sometimes they get loud. You know, different substances impact on different people in different ways, dependent on many things. Yes, we can generalize quite a bit about alcohol, but you will have seen in this group, for some people, they'll talk about having a drink makes them feel energized, and actually it's a depressant drug. It's quite interesting. Whereas for a lot of people, it's that relaxed element, you know, and it gives us, you know, it releases all those natural opiates in our brain. But also what happens is it turns off the part of our brain which is about rational thinking, making decisions, you know, planning, impulse control, and that's where our judgment gets impaired. Sometimes movement gets disrupted as well. So that, I'm just checking. Yeah, I mean, obviously it dehydrates us too, and it impacts on our sleep. So there's all sorts of stuff going on there too. Now, the other bits to be aware of is that the trouble with alcohol is that it has a neurotoxic effect on the brain. So it actually can impact, you know, it can cause brain damage, you know, even on a small way, repeatedly over time, but also, you know, quite long-term damage as well. And we're seeing, you know, in some people over the age of 50, we're seeing those alcohol-related dementias, alcohol-related brain damage, that type of stuff. But it does, even before we start talking about that, you know, brain damage, it can really impact on brain function. So even when you think about teenagers or young people, because of the way alcohol impacts on the brain, then it impacts on your brain function, which can impact on your learning. And of course, it also impacts on your sleep patterns as well. And we know that if we don't sleep properly, how this impacts on our emotions, but also impacts on our ability to learn as well. It also impacts on risk taking. Like I said before, it sort of turns off that part around rational thinking, planning, impulse control. So that's where, you know, we can get into those risk taking behaviours as well. Alcohol can increase, cause or exacerbate anxiety, low mood, depression, and can also worsen pre-existing mental health problems, and it depresses brain function. So there's an awful lot going on there in terms of impact of drinking. I'm just checking that I haven't missed anything. So yeah, alcohol dementia, alcohol related brain damage. I mean, obviously that's a lot further on down the line. What we're seeing a lot earlier is that impact on the brain function, impact on learning, impact on sleep, impact on mental health, you know, impact on anxiety and depression, that type of stuff. The key bit to remember is alcohol is a depressant which can disrupt the balance of the neurotransmitters in your brain and affect your feelings, thoughts and behaviour. There's a lot going on, isn't there? There is an awful lot going on. And I'm sure some of you, or hopefully most of you, will have noticed that when you don't drink alcohol, just generally how much better you feel. And it's like a well-roundedness better, isn't it? So essentially when you think of, so alcohol is impacting on your brain function, it's impacting on your neurotransmitters, it's impacting on your sleep. That's on a really simple level before we get into things like, you know, alcohol related brain damage, alcohol related brain, you know, dementia, you know, quite debilitating anxieties and depression and mental health problems and sleep disorders. You know, even if we just think about it on a really simple low level, you know, the impact of the neurotransmitters, the impact on brain function. And, you know, then when you stop drinking, you sleep better and you feel better, you know, your self-esteem improves, you have less anxiety, your mood improves, your clarity of thought. You hear people talk about your clarity of thought a lot better. And when you hear it like that about brain function, neurotransmitters, you know, dementia, alcohol related brain injury, all that type of stuff. Well, of course, if you're not taking a drug that causes or impacts on all those things, of course, your brain is going to fire on all cylinders. Yeah? It's a horrible drug, isn't it? And then that's before we even start talking about, you know, how alcohol impacts on our ability to process certain nutrients, you know, how it dehydrates us, how dehydration impacts on our brain function, inflammation. You know, when we talk about, you know, nutritionists will talk about the gut and gut health, you know, and how alcohol impacts on that, and then how that, because there's so much going on, the interplay with all of it. Yeah. It's not that simple. And of course, the other part to play in this is your lifestyle, how you look after yourself, and your genetics. Now, that doesn't mean that if you drink water and eat loads of vegetables, you know, and have good quality protein, that you're immune to this stuff. Absolutely not. Your genetics will play a part. But absolutely, you can massively help yourself by drinking water and eating good quality foods. You absolutely can. You can help the body to repair. But the key thing to remember is that there is no level of alcohol consumption that is without risk. Okay, I hope that was useful. See you soon.